What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and I have a little bit of explaining to do with you guys. And I know we were posting, daily content from like August through December. We were getting on a hot streak there, and then I kind of vanished on you guys. When the world needed him most, like the Avatar, I vanished. When, the Dynasty community needed me for rookie takes, I vanished. And one part of it was I kind of just needed to recharge, especially the in-season stuff where for creatively it was a little bit taxing where every single week I had to do, rankings, waiver wire, trade targets, pretty much the same 5 videos every single week, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And I know a lot of you guys came here in the offseason where I had, my 0 RB video, my strategy videos. Those are really fun. I love those videos where I can be creative. I can kind of challenge the norm in the fantasy industry and be more creative and have more rewarding work, right? And that's not to say that, I was super miserable in season and that I can complain about making money to talk about, fantasy sports or whatever. But I do enjoy when I'm making content that is thought-provoking and creative more than, just the run-of-the-mill, trade target type videos. And now, obviously, I can't make every video super in-depth, but after a month, I could have came back and I was thinking about, I'll come back, I'll just pump out daily videos. But, in terms of Dynasty, I could definitely do some deep dives and stuff, but I really wanted to take my analysis to the next level because I could have, turned on the camera, talked about, player A, player B, player C, rambled about it for 20 minutes. I'm a good rambler. I can ramble for 20 minutes about any 3 players, turn off the camera, boom, video, mail it in. But I really want the Ron Stewart channel, when you talk about me and the channel behind closed doors and, in other people's Discords and on Reddit and on Twitter, I really want you guys to really have a feel that, Ron's analysis, the analysis on this channel, you can't get it anywhere else. It's very solid. His analysis is great. His stats are great. His models are great. Just the substance behind his channel is a feel you can't really get anywhere else. And I really want to make my videos as good as they can be. I'd rather have the best quality videos than just like pump out a bunch of, me rambling. I don't know, but I just really want to have some of the best content in the space. And I thought to myself, how could I improve my Dynasty game? And I think that I've had a lot of blind spots in terms of prospects where I was maybe weighing things wrong, or it's hard to navigate these profiles without properly weighting things. So I decided I think the best way to do that would be to sit down and make models. Now that's not easy to do. You compile a bunch of stats in a Google Sheet. So I took another month off to do that. And that's what we're going to get into today. My quarterback model that I've been absolutely grinding away at. It's the strongest model across my quarterback, wide receiver, and running back models. It's really strong. We're going to get into exactly how it works, what I learned from it, in terms of evaluating quarterbacks, and then also how does the model like my top 5 quarterbacks in the 2022 class, along with pulling some rookie comps from the database for you guys. So there's a lot of cool stuff on the docket for this video. This video might run a little bit long, but I'm going to have timestamps down below. If you don't want to hear the nerdy stuff, you can skip to the end. Now, with that being said, we're going to get to that in a second. Make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Let's go.
Thirsty, thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
All right, so let's talk about my quarterback model. And the first thing that we need to kind of understand here is that quarterback models are just models in general, prospect models. You take a bunch of stats, you input them into the model, and it spits something out that predicts, how good a player is going to be at the very base of it. Now, my personal model is what I would call a true grading system, and I still haven't come up with a good name for it. I've been working on the actual model more than the creative side of things. So if any of you guys, we're going to be using these models going forward. So if any of you guys kind of come up with a cool name for it, or, I come up with something on the fly, it's set to change. But for now, just for simplicity's sake, we're going to call it the Ron Stewart grading process. And I think that for the most part, the most important thing when you're creating a model is really defining what you're solving for. And for me, it was pretty easy. I want a grade, 10 through 0, that predicts a quarterback's points per game in his first 3 years. Because I think that's a pretty good barometer for how good a quarterback is and how his career pans out, right? Anything past then, it gets murky. There's a lot of variance. There's injuries, whatever. But in the first 3 years, first of all, that's the first 3 years of the rookie deal. When you draft a quarterback in your rookie dynasty draft, I feel like it's almost pretty rare for you to keep one quarterback on your team for 3 years with the amount of trades that we do. And in those 3 years, that's the window for that rookie pick to accrue the most value, and you also want them to score points. So I think it's a really good barometer for that. So in terms of solving for a quarterback's point per game through their first 3 years, what does that grading process look like? And my grading process is I sat down, I got all the quarterbacks drafted from 2007 to 2020, and I compiled all the stats, QBR, completion percentage, PFF passing grade, athletic stats like 40-yard dash, relative athletic score, everything you could think of, and I tested them. And what I mean when I say test them is this is where it gets a little bit complicated. And what I would do is let's take draft capital, for example, right? Let's order picks 1 all the way down to like 280 in the 7th round. And what I did was I looked through, I had the stat on one side and I had the player's point per game through their first 3 seasons, and I compared, where is the fall off point, right? Like when you look at it and you see, picks 1 down to 2, is there a drop off from 1 to 2? Yeah. So then you go down. Is there a drop off from 2 and then you go down? For me personally, I didn't see a drop off till after pick 12. So then I make that next bucket. And when you get all these buckets for these stats, you then can grade from there. So I'll show on the screen here. This is what it looked like for draft capital, right? Again, I saw the drop off after the 1st overall pick, then after the 12th overall pick through the back half of the 2nd round. So those are 3 buckets, 3 criterias for draft capital just in the 1st round. We'll get to the rest of the 1st round in a little bit, but I then found the average points per game through 3 years for each of those buckets, and I put them in the chart, and then from there, that's where we get the grading. Now, we assume 18.81, right? Our top grade is our A+. Now, for the sake of this video, we're going to have A+ is 10, A is 9, A- is 8, B+ is 7, so on and so forth. Pretty much just 10 through 0, a grading scale in terms of letters to better communicate that. And for draft capital in the 1st round, the way that I found each of the grades is first we find the number grade, and we go 10 divided by 18.81, as you can see in the point per game through 3 column, times 18.81. Pretty much the 18.81s cancel out and you have 10. That is your starting point, your A+. From there, you do that same equation, but you swap out the second 18.81 for the point per game of each of these buckets, and then from there, it'll give you a grade out of 10 that is proportional, right? So 10 to 9.2, 18.81 to 17.28 points per game through 3 seasons, as you can see in the 1st bucket and 2nd bucket, is reflected 10 to 9.2. Not a big drop off, but from picks 2 through 12 to 13 to 32, we have 17.28 points per game down to 12. So that's a really big drop off, and that's when we're going to see 9.2 to 6.4. So I'll flash on the screen real quick. This is what my official draft capital thresholds look like. Again, 10 is A+, 9 and above is A, 8 and above is A-, 7 and above is B+, and so on, all the way down to F towards the 0 range. And as you can see, I did the buckets after 13 to 32. You have day 2, so that's 2nd and 3rd round. Then you have 4th round. Then I didn't really see a big drop off from 5th to 6th round, so I've had those in the same bucket. Then 7th round, all the way down. So I then take this exact, style of creating grades for each stat, and I did that across all of the stats that I found to be predictive. And the beauty of that is now every stat, right? So if you want to have draft picks and you want to add also QBR, where QBR is like, let's say your quarterback's QBR is 85 and they were drafted 1st overall, you can't just take those numbers and shove them into the, into your output, into your grade, into the model, where I don't know how to do R. I don't know how to do all the fancy coding stuff. So this was the most simple way for me to put every grade on the same playing field. And I would take, 7 or 8, there's maybe 7 or 8 grades out there out of 10, and then you weight each of them, take the average, and then out of 10, boom, there's the grade. So just for simplicity's sake, let's say you have, 9 times your draft capital out of 10 plus QBR times 1 divided by 10. That then puts out a grade that factors in your draft capital. 90% is draft capital, 10% is your QBR, right? So you can kind of blend it like that, where you climb up and you make an average, or you weight the average in a way where, you want a certain grade to affect the final grade more or less. And with this process, I have each of these spit out RS grades, right? So I have my out of 10 grades, I average them all together, it spits out these RS grades. Now here are my top 25 quarterbacks in the database from 2007 to 2020 based solely on my RS grades. As you can see, there's no perfect 10s. It's very hard to be a perfect quarterback prospect. For running back and wide receiver, I did have some perfect 10s, like Jamar Chase and Julio Jones and Saquon Barkley's. But for quarterbacks, it's much more difficult. And the only quarterbacks with a 9 or better grade is Joe Burrow and Cam Newton. They're the only ones with a 9 or better grade. Now, this is cool to look at. It's fancy. The question really becomes is, are they even that predictive? The whole idea of me setting out to do this was to make my process better, right? Somebody that I wasn't that high on was Joe Burrow, where he didn't have a great breakout age. He wasn't an early declare. He just had one really good season as a 5th-year senior. And I was like, you know what? I don't really want to buy into it. I prefer my players to, break out early, declare early, all that. Here's the thing. For quarterbacks, they're not quite the same as running backs or wide receivers where we'll get into it later, but that's not necessarily the end-all, be-all for quarterbacks. You don't need them to produce 3 years and then early declare. And I think personally that was a really big blind spot for me. So I wanted to make this as a way to refine my quarterback process, be better at scouting quarterbacks. And the only way to do that is if your model is more predictive than draft capital. As you can see by the screenshot, the model is pretty dang good for its first year. Every year we're going to make improvements on it, hopefully get the R squared up. But for now, my RS grades have a 0.674 R squared to a quarterback's point per game through their first 3 seasons. R squared is just a correlation coefficient squared. So it just shows you, how much are the grades, correlating / predicting a quarterback's first 3 years points per game. And 0.674 just means that 67.4% of the output, so 67.4% of every quarterback's point per game through their first 3 seasons can be explained by my RS grades. That doesn't seem like a massive number, but it is. Anything above like 50% for anything controlled by humans where it's pretty random and it's on a football field is pretty wild. Draft capital's R squared is only like 0.4, like maybe high 0.4. So we're out batting the NFL complex by a lot. And that's really good. Now, that's not by me doing and me it's just me pulling things from the right places and kind of, refining this, taking a lot of time on it. And there's still improvements to be made. I'm sure that there's a model out there that's better than mine, but I'm very happy with what I have here. Now, a very important part is we don't just stop there, right? We don't just put every prospect through, see their RS grade, and then, we sit back, we relax, and that's it, right? We just, every year the RS grades come in and we sit there, we look at the grades and we say, okay, those are our rookie rankings for this year. This is, I don't think that's the best thing to do, right? Because an 8.8 RS grade versus an 8.7 grade isn't that far off. The point of the grades isn't to just blindly follow them. And this is a great quote from my friend Akash. He works over at Bulletproof Process with Bean Counter and all those guys. I believe he is at like YZR Fantasy on Twitter. He said this in a sleeper group chat. I thought was great. He said that a good model should, it should guide you like the Force and you're Luke Skywalker with a blindfold on, right? So I don't want these RS grades aren't to give me the answers to the test, but it's to guide me in the right direction, to get a feel for the profiles, and then from there do my own research and just kind of within the tiers figure out how I feel about players. Now, I realize that I said tiers there without actually bringing up what the tiers are to you guys. The tiers or the bucketed grades, right? So what I ended up doing was to add a little bit more context, a little bit more, to make these a little bit more actionable, is I bucketed the grades into tiers. And this is a concept by Bean Counter, Drew Oceanuk on Twitter. I believe he's at DF Bean Counter. And he was one of the first guys I ever saw do this, where you take your prospect models, grades or outputs, and you start bucketing them. So any grade for me that's above a 7.22 falls into the elite bucket, which has a 75% top 12 season hit rate. So I bucketed each RS grade based off of a top 12 season hit rate, and we have elite, which hits at a 75% rate. We have gold, which hits at 40%. We have silver, which hits at 28.5%, and we have bronze at 3%. So we let the tiers guide us, and then from there we make the decisions. And if there's 2 guys that are like, super high end of gold and super low end of elite, you can kind of do some things there. But it's just to group the players, show us how strong the profiles are on paper. And then we do the digging, we do, the dirty work. But this is just to guide us in the right direction, like the Force from Star Wars. Now, 15 minutes through, we've only really gone through the process. Now, let's backtrack for a second. Let's talk about the components of the model. Let's backtrack for a second and kind of talk about what am I putting into the model. And I talked about this on the Malik Willis video we did last week. Check that out if you haven't already. I don't know, guys. I don't know why. Or I know why. It's because we haven't posted for a while. But it has like only 500 views. I'm telling you, I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that video. Go check it out. Okay? Go check it out. Go check out that video with Malik Willis. I'm telling you, it's a very, very solid video. Regardless, I'm half joking about that. It's fine. The algorithm, they do us dirty sometimes. But my biggest point of emphasis when making this model is I wanted to allow multiple players paths, or I wanted to allow multiple paths to dominance for players. Like I think a pitfall of analytics is only identifying one type, right? Your model kind of identifies one type really well, and then that's it. So the surefire hits, and then it kind of cuts you off from everything else. I think that a model should more so kind of guide you into a pyramid of players, right? Where you can kind of go from there, but you don't want to just get half of the field cut. And I think that an example of this, of, loving one type, is a lot of prospect models. They love, Marcus Mariota and Baker Mayfield. And my model loves them too, but they hate, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Me personally, I have Mariota as elite. I have Baker Mayfield as elite. I'm telling you, most models out there are going to have Josh Allen as a bust. My model has Josh Allen as elite. It has Lamar Jackson as elite because of the tools that they had, because they looked decent on film. They had a lot of rushing upside. They were good athletes. And I want prospects in my model to shine outside of the, the core metrics like QBR and adjusted yards per attempt, all that. I want to have other avenues. And this is actually why I ended up incorporating film grades. I have film grades incorporated to every single one of my models. In this one and in all my models, I wanted to make sure that I have a blend of analytics and film, because I just want to cover my bases the best I can. I want to identify as many winners as possible. I want to have the biggest sifter as possible. So when I shake for, the diamonds, I can get the most diamonds possible. I want to cast a wide net. So with that being said, the easiest way for me to communicate to you guys the components of the model is to split it up into 3 parts. We have film, decision-making / arm talent, and rushing upside / athleticism. Film accounts for 43% of the grade. Decision-making / arm talent accounts for 31% of the grade. And rushing upside / athleticism accounts for 26% of the grade. Now, let's dive into film, the first component. And film is pretty straightforward. I'm not personally a film guy. I can't, sit down, watch college football, and understand why a player would be a good prospect, right? I can kind of... Here's the thing, fellas. I can play a little bit of Madden. I can see, one safety over the top that's cover 3, 2 safeties. We're looking at cover 2, maybe cover 4. I know, maybe a basic understanding of what's going on the football field. But for me to watch a quarterback and tell you that what he just did can translate to the NFL, I think would be asking a lot of myself. I think that some people, pretend to be able to do that. I'm personally going to lean on the expertise of others. And I think the biggest way to do that is through draft capital. This is by far the biggest input in the entire model at 35% of the grade. And, these are billion-dollar organizations, teams that are doing hours of research, grinding film, going to pro days, looking at combine throws. Now, I know that some of them have analytics departments, but for the most part, draft capital, when teams make picks on players, it is, for the most part, a film-driven selection. So I count that as a film grade. If you're drafted highly, then you probably looked good on tape. The other component, much smaller, but still a good component at 8% of the grade, is land zero line grades. Now, I want to say there are no stats in the model that I put there just to put there. Every single stat in the model made the model have a higher R squared to points per game, and if it didn't, I cut that stat out of the model. So this is a really good input. It's 8% of the model. Lance Zierlein is the lead draft analyst at NFL.com since 2014, and that's the huge thing, since 2014. The biggest thing that I can tell film grinders out there, anybody that's aspiring to be a respected film analyst, please chart your grades. If you can just have grades set up, 5+ years of data and they're really, really strong and predictive, people are going to start using them. But you can't just say, DK Metcalf was my wide receiver 1 in 2019. You need to have a number to support that. Data guys like me, we can't just take your ranks like 1 through 5 because, DK Metcalf was your wide receiver 1. Doesn't mean that Jamar Chase is the same level of prospect as the wide receiver 1 in 2021, right? You need to have some kind of context there in terms of a grading scale, a grading system out of, however many numbers you want to do it. But Lance Zierlein has been doing that since 2014 for every prospect drafted, even those like defensive ones and all that. But I used his skill position ones and they correlate pretty strongly. His grades alone have a 0.46 R squared from his grades to first 3-year point per game, which is pretty crazy for grades that are made before the draft. His R squared or his grades are almost as predictive as draft capital themselves. And that's really it. That is, film surprisingly is the biggest input in my entire model at 43%, I think it was. 43% of the grade is determined by film. There's not really any need to incorporate more than that. You have draft capital, the NFL complex, and you have a third-party scout to kind of cover all your bases there. Then we have probably the most intricate one, which is decision-making / arm talent. And I think that name could use some work, but this component is to encapsulate how a quarterback impacts the game purely from a throwing standpoint. And this entire component, decision-making / arm talent, makes up 31% of the grade. Now, the stat that is the main driver of that at 19% of the grade is what I call touchdown interception ratio x big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio. And what that is, it's a blend of 2 stats that I like. And the first one's pretty straightforward, which is touchdown interception ratio. I take a quarterback's career average touchdown interception ratio and I then average it with this next stat, which I call big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio. I'll put the definitions on the screen. We have big time throws, which are a pass with excellent ball location and timing, generally thrown further down the field and or into a tighter window. As it says, that's a big time throw. It's down the field, it's into a tight window, it's a throw you watch and it makes you go ooh or ah. Then you have your turnover worthy plays, which is a pass that has a high percentage chance to be intercepted or a poor job of taking care of the ball and fumbling. Now, I think that this is a good thing to add on top of touchdown interception ratio, because those are touchdown interceptions. Those are real things that have happened on the field. This is a little bit more subjective, but you can throw a screen pass. A guy can take it 60 yards for a touchdown. You getting a touchdown for that, I'm not going to say it's not fair, but you get what I'm saying. It's not super, like, you didn't really score that touchdown. Same thing with interception. If you throw a guy right in the numbers and it bounces off of him and gets picked, that doesn't count as a turnover-worthy play, but it counts as an interception. So it helps even out the variance, I think, and it also helps put a little bit subjectivity to it where, a guy is really making some wowing throws, but the touchdowns just aren't really happening, especially at schools like Wyoming and Liberty with Malik Willis, where the receivers aren't great. So you can have a bunch of big-time throws, but maybe your wide receivers are dropping it. They're not really, they're not stud wide receivers, so they're not taking the ball and scoring a touchdown with it. A lot of things that can happen there. So I think it's a good thing to implement with touchdown interception ratio with all the variance that comes with it. And I also really like the big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio component regardless, just because I think that it makes a lot of sense, for the modern quarterback. Do you make enough big time throws to make your turnovers worth it? Do your highs justify your lows as an NFL quarterback? Now, I will be honest, big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio, or just this input in general, if I just correlate it straight up, this grade with point per game through 3 years, it's not the most predictive stat I have, but it's important to know with models, even the highest correlation stats, like if you have a stat that correlates, 0.6 R squared and you throw it into your model, it might not improve anything. So it's really hard to say, like, normal stats that are really predictive, it's a good thing, but it also doesn't mean the entire world in terms of the context of your model. For this, I put it into the model and I kept, jacking up the weight of it, and it kept making the R squared stronger, and I settled on 19%. So it's a really big chunk. I think it's the second biggest input outside of draft capital. So it's a really good stat in the context of my model, and I think that it kind of shined light on a blind spot the model originally had, if that makes sense. It gave boosts to guys that had not the best QBR, not the best touchdown interception ratio. I know Josh Allen was one of those guys where I think that he had like 40 plus big time throws one season to like maybe 17 or so turnover worthy plays. He had like a 2+ ratio in terms of big time throw to turnover worthy plays. Even though in like his final season, I think he had like 17 touchdowns, like 12 interceptions. It was really bad, but that gives a little bit more context. You have to remember he's playing with scrubs at wide receiver at Wyoming. Now, that was a little bit of a tangent. That's a really good stat that I use. The next best stat that I use, or next biggest input I use in this category, is QBR over expected at 6%. And the way that I find QBR over expected is I take total QBR. It's from ESPN. It's based on, how good your throws are against what level of competition you're playing against. And pretty much the way I find QBR over expected is I take that, I chart it over every year of their career, right from age 18 through 23, and I then find, what did the average top 12 quarterback have in, each year in QBR, and that's the expectation, right? You want to have the QBR of a top 12 quarterback, and then I find, how much did you overexceed that, or how much did you underperform that, and I take, your average. So let's say it's like -5, +5, and 0. You're right on the money. Okay, then your QBR over expectation for your career is 0. You were as expected in terms of a top 12 quarterback in QBR. So I take that, I do that for every single prospect, and it's not a huge input, but it shows some signal. It's a good stat. Then we have our last input, which is SRS and OF plus, which I believe SRS accounts for 2%. I believe OF plus accounts for 4% of the final grade. And what I would call is, these are competition level stats, right? First, we have SRS, which I have defined here as simple rating system, a rating that takes into account average point differential and strength of schedule. The rating is denominated in points above/below average, where 0 is average. It pretty much takes into account how good your team is and how good the opponents are, right? So just, it is a competition kind of thing where, you want to have a little bit of a ding if you're not playing at a big D1 school. So, Joe Burrow at LSU versus Josh Allen at Wyoming. You want to have that as a factor somewhere within your model. And that does just that. Now, to defend against, a player, let's say I can't think of one. Maybe like a Shea Patterson, where he's the quarterback from Michigan, really good defense, but the offense isn't great, or at least he's not throwing amazingly. Just any quarterback you can think of that's decent, but on a team that is getting juiced by SRS, not because of the offense, but because they have a really good defense. And OF Plus is essentially just Football Outsiders offensive rating, and it just communicates, the competition along with the level of offense to counteract against a team that is really good defensively but not good offensively. So pretty much, was your offense efficient? Was it good? And did you play against good competition? That's what SRS and OF Plus encapsulate. Now, the last thing I wanted to go over in terms of this section was stats I tested, but I didn't end up using. And the first one I want to talk about is breakout age. And when I found, when I did the research and I tried to find buckets, I found that it didn't really matter when a quarterback broke out. And I think that people, me included, I talked about this earlier, but a big flaw I had is, you treat every position equally, right? So quarterbacks, you look for similar things that you looking for wide receivers, right? You want them to produce early. And, that makes you lower on guys like Joe Burrow, who had, just one good year as a fifth-year senior, and then he declared as a senior. It wasn't, he wasn't an early declarer. He wasn't a prolific guy who started 3 years and then declared. So I thought that was a ding. From what I found, that's not really a big knock on a player's profile. It seems like for quarterbacks that peak performance, that fifth year going really crazy is better, or not better, but as important than career, right? Just having a really solid career average. The peaks really matter at quarterback because I think it really shows, a quarterback's upside. I think also quarterback, because it's not such a physical position where it's a lot of mental processing. If you just have one breakthrough season, I think that's all you really need to be a really good pro quarterback. When I say breakthrough season, I mean Joe Burrow, final season, Heisman level performance. And you can see that with Joe Burrow. You see that with Cam Newton. Like I said earlier, he went to Florida. He was like a JUCO guy. Didn't I think he only had like 1 year as a full starter. Same thing with Kyler. He played a little bit as like a freshman, then sat behind Baker for a little bit, and then he came out as a junior, lit the world on fire. He didn't have, like 3 years of starting experience as like a freshman and have a really, like, these quarterbacks don't have a really linear way to the top. And if they do, it's not always like a huge indicator. And something that was similar to that I wanted to test was years as a starter, right? So I actually wanted to see, maybe we slept on Justin Herbert because he played 4 solid seasons and we didn't factor that in, right? If you're a quarterback in college and you can start for your team for, multiple seasons, maybe that's a good thing. I tested it, didn't really show anything great. I really found that peaks are everything for quarterback. You really don't care about, even like final season slumps. You just want to see a player be really good at some point. You want to see that flash of potential of being a difference-making quarterback that can make all the throws and, lead their team to, playoffs and all that kind of stuff. Now, Justin Herbert flashed for different reasons. It wasn't because he started for a while. It's because, he's a big physical guy, huge hands, relative athletic score is great. He rushed in college. In his throwing stats, I want to say big-time throw to turnover-worthy plays. He has one of the best ones in the database. So Herbert is really solid in other spots that I wasn't looking at. Then another one that didn't make it to the final cut, draft age and early declare, didn't matter. Like all other positions, I thought it would be beneficial for quarterback. Didn't matter. Again, I think this is a recurring theme. You really don't have to be undeniable early and be young and declare early. You don't have to have that same pathway to greatness that wide receivers do. You really just need to explode early on. And it's more about the explosion and the magnitude of the explosion than it is about when did that explosion take place, if that makes sense. Now, a couple other ones that didn't make the cut: PFF grade, completion percentage over expectation, completion percentage, just, the PFF pass grade for one wasn't great because guys in bad conferences get juiced. Then you have CPOE, completion percentage, adjusted yards per attempt. I think all those are actually fine stats. They just didn't make my model better, but I think that they make other people's models better, and they're fine stats to use. Now, moving on, we have rushing upside / athleticism, the last component of the model, which takes up 26% of the RS grades, and that's the lowest number of all of them, but it's still a good chunk. And I like this one because I think it captures upside more than anything, where you have, a quarterback's Konami code upside and just, how can a quarterback break fantasy? And the first input I have is pretty straightforward, where it's just rushing yard market share, and it's just a player's average market share of a team's rushing yards over their entire career. Now, I also use rushing yard numbers, rushing yard market share numbers as thresholds for quarterback rushing designations. So this is, as you can see, I have the archetype here on the right side of the prospect here, and that has, Konami code, mobile, and statue. These are all based off of these rushing market share thresholds. And it just shows you, quarterbacks having a tendency. Do they have a tendency to scramble? Do they have a tendency to scramble a lot in terms of Konami? Are they statues? And that's really valuable for fantasy, because I found that athleticism is good for quarterbacks, but in terms of correlating directly to fantasy rushing points, we actually want quarterbacks. It's more tendency based than it is athleticism based, if that makes sense. Cam Newton and Andrew Luck ran the same 40 time at the combine. Cam Newton runs the ball much more than Andrew Luck. So it really is much more of a mental thing, much more of a tendency thing in terms of how much these quarterbacks run. And I think it's also a really good signal for guys that are statues in the modern NFL. Some guys that we've seen that are statues that have kind of flailed out recently. We've seen Goff, we've seen Josh Rosen, we've seen Dwayne Haskins. So there's a lot of guys that, if they're statues, they need to be really, really elite throwers with the football to succeed at the next level. And I think that's a really good context to have when we're looking at these prospects. Then our final component, which is also 13% of the upside athleticism type component of the model, is hand size and relative athletic score. And this is just a blend of both. First, we'll talk about relative athletic score. I'll put Josh Allen's card on the screen, but pretty much it's a stat made by, I want to say, @MathBomb on Twitter. He takes, a quarterback's size, speed, agility, and explosion and spits out a number 0 to 10. And that is their athleticism compared to other quarterbacks, right? So like a 4.75 for a quarterback is, way better than a 4.75 for a wide receiver. So it puts quarterbacks on the same playing field as their counterparts. Josh Allen had a 9.67. That's an A+ type score in RAS, just to show you guys kind of to get a feel for what RAS is. Then I also have the second component, which is hand size. And at first I was a little bit skeptical of if hand size would really make anything better in the model. It actually did. There's some guys that have huge hands that are good, right? You have Dak Prescott has like the biggest hands in my database. Same thing with Nick Foles, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Andrew Luck. I think hand size itself doesn't really show, it's hard to say what it does, but I think that it shows throw power, right? Big hands. I feel like a lot of quarterbacks with big hands can throw the ball harder. I know Josh Allen has some of the biggest hands in the league. Again, Andrew Luck, Justin Herbert, Herbert and Josh Allen, guys that can sling it with 10-inch hands. You also have, I want to say it also, just a guy having big hands. In a way, I feel like it does factor into just total overall athleticism, right? If you have big hands and you're just a big boy, then you're probably banging bodies. I don't know. That's the best way I can sum it up. So then I have a grading scale through 10 for both, for RAS and for hand size. I average them together. That gives us this grade. It just gives us a clear picture at who is an athlete to go alongside with their rushing upside. Ideally, you have a guy who runs the ball a ton and then also has the athleticism to make up for it. And I wanted to use 40-yard dash. I thought that 40s would be a little bit better, but they don't really correlate a ton. Again, I'm telling you guys, tendency is the biggest thing here. And then also just functional athleticism more than just straight line athleticism. That's why I used RAS. Now, we are finally done explaining the model. All of those components encapsulate into my RS grade. And you have the prospect here as elite, gold, silver, bronze, like we said. This is the juicy part of the video. I'll put a timestamp down here. This is going to be one of the longest videos I've made in a while, but I need to have something for you guys to come to the video with. I'll probably put on the thumbnail, top 5 quarterbacks, whatever, so that you guys actually come to the video and watch it. Because if I just said, I don't even know what I would title it, like model talk, it probably wouldn't do anything. I really don't expect the video to do much anyways, but I figured, if you made it this far, might as well give you guys a little bit of a, something a little bit more juicy, a little bit of a reward. And this is going to be the section of the video we talk about, applying the model. What are my top 5 quarterbacks in this class based on the model, and what are their closest comps? Now let's talk about quarterback 1, a quarterback in a tier of his own. In tier 1, we have Malik Willis up top. And before we even talk about Malik Willis, let's show this screenshot. Let me break it down a little bit because it's a little bit of a loaded screen grab for you guys. First, we have on the left, we have prospect info, which is a quarterback's draft round, their draft pick, their draft year. Now, I also want to say Malik Willis hasn't been drafted yet, but that is just his projected draft capital based on Grind the Mocks, really solid website where they project draft capital based on thousands of mocks. Then we have a player's prospect tier. These guys are all elite, but again, these prospect tiers, we have elite that hit top 12 quarterback seasons at a 75% rate. Gold hits them at 40%, silver 28.5%, bronze 3%. Then after that, we have a quarterback's rushing archetype, which rounds out the prospect info. That gives us the entire picture in terms of just basic information for the prospect. Then on the right, we have the rookie comps area, which is where I separated the model's outputs into 3 components, and then I graded them using letters just so it's easier for you guys to understand in terms of, just in terms of letter grades and how do these players grade out in each of the 3 core components. Then at the absolute far right, we have RS grade, which I left as numbers, just to show you guys what is the model spitting out for that player. Now, the rule of thumb for grouping these prospects were for the comps to only go above or below one grade level, right? So if a prospect has a B plus on film, only prospects with A minus, B plus, or B were eligible to make it into that quarterback's comps. And I did that for all three of the components, and then it spit out the comps, of course, within that player's prospect tier. Now, when we look at Malik Willis, I'm not going to gush about him and keep talking about him because I made that whole video last week. If you want to check it out, I go in depth, step by step through his prospect profile, but his comps are really, really solid. He has immense upside with that elite Konami code designation. Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are in his range of outcomes. He has the upside to be a top 6 startup pick, right? 5 of the top 6 quarterbacks in startup drafts are elite Konami code QBs. If Malik Willis's top 12 draft capital holds, I think that his film holds up enough where he has draft capital and Lance Zierlein likes him. Then you have his rushing upside / athleticism at the end there. A minus, really, really solid. His decision making is questionable, which makes him volatile. But again, I mean, Josh Allen had a C, Wentz had a C plus, and Mahomes and Trubisky weren't that much better. He is not. His decision making isn't the worst. His big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio also very solid. And I think that Wentz and Trubisky as his, floor type outcomes aren't that bad at all. I think Jalen Hurts is a good floor outcome. Again, if he gets drafted top 12, he will start for 3 years. Being a Konami code quarterback and being as athletic as he is, I think he will provide you enough of a floor where he can, support top 15 quarterback value for a year or two. And if you decide that he is not good in real life, you can always just flip him at that value. I said this in the Malik Willis video. Jalen Hurts is QB 14 right now in Dynasty. Only 12 running backs are ahead of him. He literally has job security concerns in real life. And that's not a bad outcome at all. You could probably trade Jalen Hurts for, an early first right now. So I think Malik Willis has, asymmetrical upside where, his floor really isn't that bad for a Konami code upside quarterback. And I think that he does have, a range of outcomes unlike anybody else in this class where he can be, he has a pathway to be a top 6 startup pick in the future. Now that's going to bring us to tier 2 where we have Matt Corral. And after Malik Willis, there's a massive drop off into tier 2 for me. And again, Matt Corral, easily at the top. He's my quarterback 2, but it's not a strong tier. These aren't quarterbacks I really want to draft that bad. And Matt Corral, when we look at the comps here, they're not great. He has Johnny Manziel, Paxton Lynch, EJ Manuel, Jordan Love, and Josh Freeman. None of those guys are very good, right? His comps are kind of mid, but on paper, I don't really mind Matt Corral's profile at all. He showed a lot of promise. He didn't look that great this season, but the season before that with Elijah Moore in his final season, he had one of the best QBR seasons for, I think, a 21 or 22-year-old in my entire database. And he just seems like a fun, gunslinger type quarterback. I know Lance Zierlein has his best comparable player as Baker Mayfield. I think, baby Baker Mayfield with like a little bit less strong of an analytic profile is a decent comparable for him. The thing is that I think that the reason why his comps are bad is pretty much because of draft capital, which I have him projected for 26 overall, which is from Grind the Mocks. The thing is that Matt Corral is one of the few guys in this class that has a strong enough profile where if he went top 12, he would also be an elite Konami code QB. And if that happened, he would be probably in my top 3 to 5 for rookie superflex drafts. Right now, he's more of a mid to late guy where he probably fits more into the Daniel Jones, Jake Locker, Johnny Manziel type mold of quarterbacks that I have as first rounders that were also gold Konami code QBs. So probably gives you decent production. Never wows you, but again, if the NFL, I think that he does have a chance of, going early first round, top 12 picks. If the NFL does decide to take him that early, I will be much more in on Matt Corral. But for now, he is very firmly my QB2. I don't think there's anything else that could happen unless not if Kenny Pickett did, but if Sam Howell or Desmond Ridder went top 12, I would bump them ahead of Matt Corral. Then we have Kenny Pickett at QB3. And I hate Kenny Pickett's profile. On paper, he doesn't look great at all. He's really just buoyed by the scouts. The scouts like him, right? He is the only quarterback outside of Malik Willis that I'd have as a lock for the top, 20 picks of the NFL draft. Right now, he's projected for 17th, but I've seen him go in mocks as early as 6th overall to the Panthers. Lance Zierlein doesn't hate him either. Lance Zierlein has him, as I think he's tied for QB2 with Matt Corral in terms of film grade. Apparently, he looks good on tape. But again, I don't watch tape, so in terms of the numbers, I don't love it at all. I will say that it's a little bit strange I say that because I want to say his comps are probably as good, if not better, than Matt Corral's. I was being very generous, allowing the B+ rushing upside / athleticism grades in there, while Kenny Pickett has a B-. So really only Drew Lock should have made it into this comp screenshot, but I don't want to just have him just comp to Drew Lock. So I had everybody else, into the comp list. But it doesn't look great. A huge knock for him was those 8.5-inch hands. And I know it's hard to say, hand size is the reason a player shouldn't be good. I don't really love, like the double gloves thing. It gives me Teddy Bridgewater vibes. I know that that's like very like bro science, but I don't like that at all. Like my quarterback ideally is like Justin Herbert, where he has big ass hands and he can sling it. Kenny Pickett he really does seem like Teddy Bridgewater to me, and I think I guess that's a fine outcome. Teddy Bridgewater I think is a fine outcome. I don't even hate. I think Josh Freeman is a fine comp for Kenny Pickett. He just doesn't excite me at all, which sucks because the NFL is the most excited about this kid for whatever reason. He's listed as mobile. Again, his hands get an F grade. His relative athletic score is actually pretty solid with a 9.54, but he wasn't like an uber rusher in college. He wasn't somebody that ran the ball a ton. It is rough. I don't think he has a ton of rushing upside. I think really his film is the only thing that's carrying him, and his arm talent stats were the worst part of his profile for a guy that I don't think relies on, the same way that Malik Willis relies on his athleticism. Best big-time throw to turnover-worthy play ratio was 1.59. For perspective, Malik Willis, who's supposed to be one of the worst passers in this draft class, had a 2.22 ratio, so much better than Pickett. Ideally, you want to have like above a 2. He just doesn't, like, nothing really comes off, the page besides his film grade. Ideally, I would like to have his decision-making or rushing upside / athleticism, kind of speak for the profile. Neither do. It's really all on the back of draft capital and Landseer line grades. So, I mean, you can sit here and just trust the film graders, but for me, he's a low upside quarterback. I don't really see the appeal. I don't hate, a Joe Flacco, Josh Freeman type comp for him. Like, I think Mark Sanchez isn't a bad one either. This just seems like one of those profiles that scouts like that don't really make a ton of sense. Now, again, unlike Matt Corral, even if Kenny Pickett goes in the top 12, he will not have enough of a prerequisite score to be an elite quarterback, so he'll literally just still be a gold. At that point, maybe he'd be my QB2. If he goes like top 10, he'll be my QB2, but again, really not thrilled to take Pickett. He's like a late first round pick for me in Superflex rookie drafts. Then our QB4, still in tier 2, is Desmond Ridder, and I love Desmond Ridder. Now, sadly, I actually had to make this update today. We're going to do a video later on in the week where I go through and update everything, but there was a Grind the Mocks update, right? So that website I really like for projected draft capital. They came out with an update the other day where they updated everything. They moved players around. So based on that, if a player falls from one bucket to another, it can move them up or down. So I'll make a video on who got bumped up and who got bumped down from pro day relative athletic scores and then also draft capital movements. Desmond Ridder is one of the guys that got bumped down. He still stayed in gold, but it bumped him from like a high gold to a low gold. Not a huge thing, but the reason I had to move him down to QB4 is just because there's a lot of volatility with his profile in terms of draft capital. That's the biggest thing for Desmond Ridder. I love the profile on paper. We'll get into that in a second. But from a draft capital perspective, he could be a top 12 pick. He could be a second round pick. He could also fall all the way into the third round. In terms of draft capital, it's all over the place. I really only have Pickett ahead of him because Pickett is much more of a lock to just get, top 20 draft capital, be a first round pick, and that's pretty big. But for Desmond Ridder, draft capital for him, very volatile, but on paper, I like his profile. And I think his comps are pretty fair, right? We have EJ Manuel and Josh Freeman as kind of his floor comps, which are, fine, quarterbacks that are, mobile but not great throwers. And then I think Kaepernick as his upside scenario makes a lot of sense. Guys who, Nevada, Cincinnati, kind of smaller schools, athletic guys. Though Kaepernick was more athletic, Ridder was actually better at throwing than Kaepernick in college. As you can see, he has a B- in the decision-making category, which is higher than EJ Manuel and Colin Kaepernick, which is actually pretty wild because I think that on paper, he's kind of considered one of the worst throwers in this class. But Desmond Ridder has a better decision-making grade than Corral, Willis, and Pickett, all three quarterbacks we just went over. And I also love his Konami Code rushing upside. He falls into the Konami Code category. He has really high upside. I think that, Jalen Hurts, Kaepernick type upside in the second round makes a lot of sense. If he goes in the first round, even better. If he goes top 12, he will fall into the elite Konami Code QB category. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on if Matt Corral or Desmond Ridder go in the top 12, they're going to get huge bumps up in my rankings. Then finally, after 51 minutes of rambling, this is going to be maybe the longest video I've ever made. I'm very sorry to the editor, but this is just what had to be done. Now, the last quarterback we're going to talk about, Sam Howell. Take out the I'm sorry to the editor thing.
No, I don't think I will.
Now, our last quarterback after 50 minutes of rambling in tier 3 is Sam Howell. Now, I have him in a tier by himself. And here's the thing. I personally don't mind him, but his film, he's kind of the opposite of Kenny Pickett, where his film grade is the one that's lacking, or his film component is weighing him down. First, we have Landseer, who has him as his quarterback 5 in the class. And then we have the NFL draft capital, projected right now as the quarterback 5 in the class. He's projected to get drafted behind the 4 quarterbacks we already listed. And Landseer has him behind the 4 quarterbacks we already listed. So draft capital and this, third-party scout lining up on this quarterback not looking good on tape, it's hard not to have that as a major ding on his profile. Again, I don't mind him on paper, but if the scouts really don't like him, I have to at least trust them a little bit. Now, in terms of what I see on paper, right, he has a C+ film grade. In terms of what I see on paper, in terms of a B- decision-making grade, that's really solid. He had a really, really good 3.3 big-time throw to turnover-worthy play ratio. That is, I want to say, like the highest of the class. He looked really good. He also outperformed his QBR every single season. He started 3 years, early declare, all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't really factor that in a ton. I think that's kind of why he doesn't grade out well, is because in my model, my model doesn't care that he was an early declare and he started for 3 years, even though I know some people do value that. Now, for what it's worth, I don't love his comps. I think, somewhere between Geno Smith and Andy Dalton is probably fair if he goes, early second round. I think he's better than, a Kyle Trask or, that type of prospect, or, somebody like that. So I think Geno Smith and Andy Dalton are fair. I think he'll start some games in the NFL. We really just need to see the film check out in some way. If he can sneak into the first round, that'll be huge for him. It'll put him in a tier of gold, and I'll have him in the same tier as Corral, Pickett, and Ridder, maybe even have him QB2, QB3. If he stays second round, I'll have him in a tier below that. And if he goes top 12, sadly, his Lance-Zierlein grade and his rushing upside isn't really enough, and his decision-making was good at B-, but not amazing. Even if he goes top 12, it won't be enough to push him into elite, so we're really just hoping that he gets first-round draft capital, and he'll pretty easily be a top 3 quarterback for me, but until then, I'll be a little bit more on the conservative side. I'll have him at QB5 for now. Now, that was a lot of info to take in here. If you enjoyed the video, if you enjoyed this type of analysis and this type of statistical deep dive stuff, and you want to help keep the lights on in the basement, make sure you go down below to patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be in the description. You can literally just type it into the search bar above. It'll bring you right to the website, and it'll give you access to all of my prospect grades, my rookie comps across all positions, my rankings. I have my top 48 Superflex tight end premium rankings already live for rookies. All of them have my prospect grades there, my running backs, my wide receivers, my quarterbacks. And I also, while I'm doing this research, I even have a spot in the Discord now for the premium members where I'll update them, live as I'm doing research and as I'm making these findings. So they have all been tuned into, this entire video for the last month and a half, where as I was, spending those late nights, grinding on the Excel sheets, I was writing stuff in the Discord and, bouncing ideas off of people. So it's a really cool spot. And, we talk about trade advice, the normal Dynasty stuff as well. So all of that is included in there for, I'm telling you, I'm ripping myself off at $5 a month. So if you want to check that out, $5 a month, that's the plan for now. But I plan to, on Friday, I'm going to sit down, revamp the entire Patreon. I'm going to, go through what each tier gets. I'm going to bump up the first tier to probably $8. And everyone that was on the Patreon before that, they're going to be grandfathered in. They'll always be $5 a month for as long as they continue to pay. But moving forward, it will be different. So if you want to get in before that happens on Friday, make sure to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. As always, I love you guys. Make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like. I'm not going to stay here any longer because this was a long ass video. As always, I'll see you guys in the next one.
Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena from misdemeanors. Dreamer, held back asses, Loki still a